Okay, we're going to start the meeting. Commissioners meeting, Thursday, September 26, 2013. Welcome everybody, and I'm going to start with introductions. I'll open up with myself, Brian Tapscott, Summersworth.
Marilyn Barton, Strafford Regional Planning Commission.
Tom Crosby, Maverick.
Matt Sullivan, Strafford Regional Planning Commission.
Todd Smithall, Strafford Regional Planning.
Sandy Keynes, Rochester.
Ken Orban, Rochester. Steve Brown, Wakefield.
And Comeau, Wakefield.
Cynthia Copeland, Strafford Regional.
Brandon Anderson, Durham.
Bill Connor, Summersworth.
And Victoria Plumley. Okay, thank you. Okay. Because we don't have a quorum on Article 5 of the Commission Handbook, Section 3 of the bylaws states, a quorum of the Commission shall be deemed as representing no less than one-half of the dues-paid communities, municipalities, that have appointed commissioners. In circumstances when a quorum is not present, and when commission action is essential, the chairman may declare a quorum with the unanimous approval of those commissioners present. So I'm going to ask a motion from somebody from the dues-paying communities for that motion. It's got to be unanimous. We have 5 communities, dues-paying communities, we need 5 votes.
I will so move.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, well, we got a quorum. All right, item 2, action items. The motion's required for 2.1, draft minutes of May 30th, 2013.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we adopt the minutes as presented.
Motion by Kinnon, second by, Bill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I abstain, since I wasn't there.
Opposed? 1 abstention. And 2.2, we have the fiscal year 2015 Strafford Regional Planning Commission dues.
Mr. Chair, for purposes of discussion, I'll make a motion that we adopt the dues as presented.
Okay?
I'll second that.
Motion by Ken, second by Tom. Discussion?
Well, they're exactly the same as they were last year, except for one minor correction. In the city, the town of Wakefield, there had been a technical error there where all 5,078 people the rate was charged at $1.1355, and the 78 people who took them over the 5,000 threshold should have been charged at the 53.56 rate, and so that correction was made, and so there was a slight reduction in their dues rate. But other than that, these are exactly the same as they were a year ago.
Thank you. Further discussion? Ed?
Mr. Chairman, which towns are not paying dues?
Dover, I'll go
ahead.
alphabetically down the list. Dover, Farmington, Wakefield, Nottingham is new this year, Milton. That's it. Brookfield.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further discussion? Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's it. Item 3, presentation. Draft Strafford Regional Broadband Plan. We'll have Matt Sullivan, Regional Planner. Give us a heads up on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to take this opportunity tonight to both inform and educate our commissioners and also the citizens in the audience about what's going on in our region as far as our New Hampshire broadband mapping and planning program. What we've been doing that over the last year, and also what we're going to be doing the next year, which is actually the final year of the project. So I'll take you through a little bit of the last year, take you through also the regional broadband plan, which you also have an excerpt in your packet. That's just a piece of it. I'll take you through that, and then at the very end, I'll talk about what we're going to be doing the next year. And obviously, if you have questions, we can talk about that. So you may remember last year on the 27th of September, we had a meeting here. It was a very lively discussion. We had over 60 attendees for our first regional broadband forum. We had a presentation discussion from me. It was really just an overview and touching on the project background and really the work to date, which at that time we had 3 years of books, so we had obviously completed 3 years of work, which was quite a bit, but it was the first time we had held one of these forums to interact with the public. We had, however, interacted with the public through different public involvement processes before that, but this was our unveiling of our work to date. There, we had a great dialogue about concerns and barriers related to the regional broadband adoption and utilization. And also the comments that we received, we also incorporate into our draft regional goals and visions. So that's something you'll see in the plan just a little bit here. There were a lot of great comments during that meeting, and they were really interesting to read through and incorporate into that plan. So over the last year, we've been working on several things. Some of them are planning related, and then some of them are actually mapping related. And I'll talk about the difference between those two. But the first thing we've been doing is we've been holding these sector-based interviews, and these are really it's an opportunity for us to interact one-on-one with professionals in a couple different sectors and talk to them about what the broadband needs are and what the barriers are for different applications and different other things in those sectors. And that could be healthcare, public safety, local government, education, and also we've been talking to citizens as part of that sector-based interview process as well. But it's been a very unique process to interact with different folks and hear what exactly broadband needs are in those given sectors. Second, we've been working on this mapping verification project. This has actually been with the assistance of one of our interns, Shannon Sylvia. We've been meeting with municipal leaders to discuss what the actual broadband landscape is like in the community, see what concerns they may have heard at planning board meetings or just in their everyday activities, where there might not be cable service, where there might not be DSL service. We've had meetings with those folks, and then we've taken that information. We're going to integrate it into our mapping data that we already have. And one other thing we've also been doing is taking that data and going out in the field and checking whether what they're saying is actually correct. So we're taking those comments, going out in the field, checking the accuracy of them, coming back and updating our maps. So it's been a really great process to really improve the precision and accuracy of the mapping that supports a lot of this project. The third item here that we've been continuing really is our broadband stakeholder group meetings. And what those are is they're really a process that's intended to identify needs and barriers in the region. It's yet another one. We're doing this with a lot of different groups. And again, it's aimed at identifying needs and barriers to adoption and utilization, common goal. The last item, which is of course huge for us, is the completion of this draft regional broadband plan. It's actually due for release on September 30th, which is on Monday, so we're actually ready to release now, but it will officially be released on Monday. It's very exciting for us. It's really kind of the culmination of 4 years of work, and we'll have a year after that to bring it together. And with that said, the plan is about at 75% completion right now. There are some elements that are left to be completed by our broadband stakeholder group. I'll talk about what elements those are a little later in the presentation, but we're very well along. This is the cover page. Obviously, it's dated a couple days ago, but this is what we're working with right now. So the New Hampshire Broadband Mapping and Planning Program is a statewide effort. We are working on our regional component here. So what does the project tell us that we're going to be working on over the next year? Well, it wants us to continue doing kind of this ongoing review of our mapping component analysis. And there are a couple of elements to that. We have community anchor institutions, which I'll talk about in a second. Also that mapping verification process where we're actually going out doing field checking of broadband technologies on the utility poles. Second here, we're completing our draft regional broadband plans. We've already done that, so we could put a check right in that box, which we're really excited about. Integrating other New Hampshire broadband mapping and plan activities. We have a lot of partners in this program, and what we're working on doing is bringing the efforts of those partners into our plan and creating kind of an appendix structure that allows us to accurately depict the work that they've done and really highlight the work that they've done in our plan. Next is preparing that final regional broadband plan. That's due June 30th of next year. And the fifth item is actually conducting, obviously, this forum, the last forum, and our next forum will likely be in September of next year, and will be a similar review as tonight, in that we'll be looking at the final regional broadband plan, taking you all through that, and accepting comments. Lastly, we'll be coordinating with the New Hampshire Office of Energy and Planning. They also have a role in the New Hampshire Broadband Mapping and Planning Program. They have their own work tasks they were set to complete. and we're continuously coordinating with them throughout this entire effort. So this is kind of our outlook for the next year, and it's something there's obviously a lot of work involved, but we're very excited to complete all this. So this is really intended, it's kind of an internal use. These are all of the dates that we have to hit for the next year. It may be a little bit much for some of our citizens in the audience who don't yet know about the project, but I'll take you through it right now. Obviously, we're reviewing this draft plan with citizens of the Regional Broadband Forum. That's tonight. It's an important component. Next week, we'll be submitting this draft. After that, we'll be incorporating the comments and obviously the minutes and notes from this meeting into the draft regional plan. Any comments tonight are very important to us, obviously, and any changes that you can see in that plan excerpt are very important. I would say that after this meeting, if you're interested in seeing the actual draft plan, it'll be available online for our website, and I encourage you to check that out. Next, we'll be meeting with our broadband stakeholder group to discuss the draft plan. That's kind of our focus group that's really working with us throughout this project. They're going to have more comments, so it's going to be a constantly evolving document, really. And then we'll have another broadband stakeholder group meeting in January. We're going to send a revised plan to Southwest Regional Planning Commission in January. They're kind of overseeing much of this project. They're kind of the point man for a lot of this. Then we'll be completing our implementation section, which is one of those sections that we really need assistance from our broadband stakeholder group with. And actually, we need assistance from our commissioners as well as we give us comments. Then we'll be updating all of our, or we'll be completing our regional broadband plan for June 30th and submitting that to Southwest again. And then the final plan will be due late in 2014. So let me explain a little difference there. June 30th, 2014 is when the final plan is to be completed. And then late in 2014 is when the comments on the final plan are to be integrated and that document will finally be released. Where in September, we'll be presenting the plan to you folks for another review. Finally, we hope that this document will actually get approved by the Commission sometime in December 2014 or early 2015. The project is actually set to wrap up down in the right-hand corner in December of 2014, where we essentially won't be funded anymore. However, approval isn't contingent on funding necessarily. So if that document isn't approved into 2015, that's okay. We want to be ready for the Commission to approve, so we'll do the necessary work there. So, quite a bit of work. Very overwhelming, but very exciting at the same time. So, we've created this draft regional broadband plan. It's been quite a bit of effort. It's actually about 160 pages in length, and that actually doesn't include some of the pieces from our partners. We aim for somewhere below 300 in our final plan. It's obviously a very daunting document, but obviously broadband is very innovative technology, and really you can't say too much about it, so it's 300 pages isn't quite doing it justice, we don't think. This is the table of contents. It's intended to be a bit overwhelming here. Many elements you'll recognize from other plans. We have our list of exhibits, which is going to be our data tables, our maps, our figures. We'll go into a preface talking a little bit about our involvement, who was involved on staff here. The executive summary will obviously be kind of that snapshot view of the plan. What's in there? If someone wants to take a quick look at this thing, what do they want to know immediately? That'll be in that executive summary. Then we'll be going to this introduction, and that's really talking about what are the mapping elements of this project, what are the planning elements of this project, and what are the other elements that the other statewide partners are working on. Then we'll move into a different section, and that's understanding broadband. That's really talking about what is broadband, what does it mean for different groups, and why is it important looking into the future? Why are we writing this plan? Why is it important to our region? Then we'll talk about what broadband looks like in the region right now. What are our vision? What's our vision? What are our goals? And we'll kind of reach this conclusion about what we intend the rest of the plan to accomplish. Then we'll move into this regional overview. This is kind of a section that's included in a lot of different plans, and it talks about obviously our geography, our historic development patterns, housing, the economy, education, wages and income, our basic demographics. And it's intended to kind of provide that snapshot of the region so we can make some statements later on in the document about how broadband might impact these different areas. Then in regional broadband availability, we'll talk about our mapping results and what those tell us, which you'll actually see in the meeting or the packets that were over there. There are some maps in there. There are some maps later in the presentation I'll show you. But those mapping results are really what much of this project is built upon. We put a lot of time and effort into them, and we're actually very, very proud of them. And then we'll discuss regional demand for broadband, and that's really getting into what the public involvement process has taught us. What are the needs and barriers around broadband in the region? we'll discuss that. Public involvement process will actually be a review of what those different kind of mediums of discussion with the public were. That'll just be kind of an overview. Challenges to regional broadband implementation and improvement. This is kind of a summation of all of those challenges that will be listed in that regional demand for broadband section. Then we'll also do a summation of the adoption and utilization barriers, opportunities for regional broadband implementation improvement. This is kind of a preface to our implementation section. Then we'll talk about broadband needs again for each of these different sectors, which this is going to be probably the longest section of the plan. We're going to go through each of these sectors and discuss what their future needs are, what applications are out there that are really innovative right now that others are using, or what's on the horizon that others might not be using that they could be using in the future. Then implementation, what efforts might be implemented in the region, what are our next steps moving forward, and then this last section, the appendices. There are a whole bunch of appendices that are going to be in there, and I'll talk about those later in the presentation. So there's quite a bit of it. In the introduction, again, we'll be talking about these different components. The planning component, obviously, is what the regional planning commissions have been doing. And it's really an effort to understand broadband availability in New Hampshire, and particularly for us, availability in our region. But again, there is kind of that statewide component to this. How can we increase broadband adoption utilization through outreach, community engagement, and also surveying activities, which we've done all of those different things in this effort. Next, the mapping component is actually a combined effort from the Regional Planning Commissions in Granite, which is UNH's kind of GIS clearinghouse. They're a GIS, which is a mapping kind of entity down there at UNH and Cooperative Extension. They provide us with a lot of valuable resources. They're very, very useful, and they've been a great partner of the project. So here we're going to kind of review what the inventory mapping efforts were, and maybe a little bit of a review of what is actually in those mapping results. Next, we'll talk about the technical assistance and training from UNH Cooperative Extension. This is really developing and administering technical assistance, and this is a process that's been going on in the last year, and will continue to the next year as well, where UNH Cooperative Extension is actually going out to communities and talking to them about how they might be more present in the digital map, or in the digital world, or in the online world, how we can really, touch members of our community through digital means or online means. So they're going out and meeting people about that. And obviously the tie there is that these digital mediums are really the result of broadband technologies. Next, capacity building is something that we don't really work directly with. This is actually DRED, Department of Resources and Economic Development. And what they're working on is actually infrastructure projects in the state. You may have heard of Fast Roads, which is a fiber project over on the eastern or western side of the state. We're actually constructing things with this gimmick. This is really exciting for us to see these efforts actually happening on the ground now before the project is done. Again, understanding broadband. So what I'm going to do here is kind of go through each of these components and talk a little bit about some of them. Understanding broadband. What is broadband? This is NTIA's definition, but what we found is that it really is dependent on who the user is. Is it someone maybe in Brookfield or Wakefield who may not have the access that they would like to? And what is broadband for them? Is it 768 kilobytes per second, or is it 3 megabytes per second? For someone in Dover, it might be 100 megabytes per second. It's variable, and it also depends on what you're using broadband for. Are you running a home business? Are you telecommuting for work? Do you just want to watch Netflix when you get home from work? That definition is really dependent on who exactly we're having a conversation with. So we're discovering that through this project. How does it work? We really want to take it from the core network, which is the backbone, so the local network, back to the end user, which is you, all of our consumers, businesses, residents, those users. Why is it important? This is another thing we've kind of figured out that it's different for different sectors. For residents, education, healthcare, public safety, economic development, it really depends on who you're talking to about why exactly broadband is important. But we'll be talking about this in this understanding broadband section. It's actually included in the packet as well. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the regional broadband landscape. This is kind of our existing conditions and what broadband looks like right now in the region. It'll be based along that broadband mapping data. It'll also include some information from our public involvement as well. And also this regulatory audit that we performed, looking at our communities and seeing what elements that kind of protect broadband infrastructure or are geared towards broadband infrastructure are included in our community master plans, zoning, and regulations. So we did this over the last year, and we found it was actually a really telling analysis, so that will be included in that section. Next, we'll talk a little bit about, these are our regional goals for this plan. I won't read through all of these to save the time right now, but I encourage you to read through your packets. Obviously, we want to do a lot of different things. We'd like to attract businesses to the region. We like to increase transparency in local government. Obviously, that's a huge one for us. Ensuring healthcare, public safety, education, and other CAIs, community anchor institutions, I'll talk about those in a minute, how they can get better access to broadband to allow them to provide those essential services to communities. And there are a couple other points in there that you can go through, but we're looking to do a lot of things with this plan. We're not necessarily going to implement any of these. That's not our role in this project, but we're looking at the region and where we'd like to be in the future. Next, we'll be doing this regional overview, and it's really going to be, it's included in your information here. Actually, it's not included in your information here, but what it's really intended to do is look at those demographics, housing data, education, economic data. That's actually going to be updated over the next year as we do a lot of data updates under our regional master plan effort. But again, it covers those different topic areas there, and really the intent is to provide a snapshot view of the region so we can make some statements later in the document. Next, we'll go into this kind of broadband availability, which is based on our mapping efforts. I've included a couple maps here. I won't spend too much time on each of them. I think they each tell an interesting story. So this one right here is broadband availability for uses that require high speed. So whether or not you have broadband access, that would allow you to perform functions that require high speed. So we can see immediately here, the purple colored area, the southern region of the state, or southern portion of the region, they're fairly well served when it comes to actually doing high use functions with broadband. When it comes to the northern region, we can see that they aren't quite where we'd like them to be. So maybe some better broadband access is needed. Here, we did a map of our community anchor institutions on the left-hand side here. You can see these very small colored dots. It's likely that you can't read what each of those are unless you have the actual packet in front of you right now. We have our healthcare facilities, schools, other community support, those different government buildings, things like that. We actually have surveyed them through the process and asked them what broadband speeds they're getting, whether it's adequate for their needs, how much they're paying for it, whether they'd like to see better broadband service in the future. We've done this survey, and we've actually created this data set of points throughout the region of these community anchor institutions, and we can use that data to tell us different things about how sectors are progressing broadband. Next, on the right, we have degree of competition. This is a really interesting one. Essentially what's displayed here is how many service providers are currently listed as providing service. That you may be a bit confused by that. You may think, oh, well, I can only get Comcast in my community, or I can only get MetroCast in my community. Surprisingly, a lot of service providers are available in communities if they're willing to pay for them, or if you require a certain need. So again, this map, I will look to the handout to actually read those figures, but obviously some areas of the region are more competitive than others. It's very, very interesting. So that's something we're looking at as well. Maximum advertised download speed. This is a pretty simple one. Essentially, the more red here is a higher download speed. And again, we can see that the southern portion of the region is better served than the northern portion. That orange color is decent, and the brown color is not so great. So we're seeing some trends throughout our region, really some north to south trends. Similarly, with level of service, we're seeing some gaps in some of our middle communities there, more in the southern region and a little more in the northern region as well. Sometimes what we find is that there's a lot of terrestrial and mobile wireless installations that we actually report up in the northern region. That's really interesting to look at. But this data gets a little bit stretched. Next, we have broadband technology. So this is associated with maximum advertised download speed. So what's displayed here is what technology is providing the fastest maximum advertised download speed. And we can see through much of the region that cable is doing that. In some areas, the darker green areas, that's actually DSL. And in some other areas, we can see those purple areas, those are actually terrestrial mobile wireless that's providing the fastest download speed, which is actually really surprising. This is a really interesting map to look at when we see what technologies are actually providing the fastest speed across the region. Next, we're going to talk about some work that the UNA Survey Center did for us, the New Hampshire Broadband Mapping Planning Program. They actually performed a survey May through July of this year. There were questions related to a lot of different things: housing, transportation, economic development, and broadband internet access, which obviously we're using that broadband internet access data to kind of strengthen our plan. Over 2,000 New Hampshire residents participated, and really the question is that when we got the data, what did we learn? So here are some charts that are kind of interesting to look at, and I will say that the orange colors on here are the Srpc region, and the gray are the statewide results. We kind of look at both of those at the same time. The question is obvious here, do you have internet access at home? It's clear right away that the Srpc region, while it's a very small difference, we are not as well served as the rest of the state. That's not to say that we're actually in pretty good shape, but we are not as well served as the rest of the state. Obviously, it's a very interesting thing to look at. Which of the following is most important to why you don't have internet access at home? This is actually another interesting one. We see a lot of folks saying it's too expensive, and also a lot saying I don't need it in this area. So those are two things to consider. Some folks just don't need broadband and they're paying for it. So it's interesting to look at that last slide that we looked at people who don't have broadband. What percentage of those are actually doing it because they don't need it, essentially. Also, we see this kind of category over to the right, which is some of the reason. And we can't really say what exactly that is. That's something that people chose to keep to themselves, but for some other reason, they don't have broadband access. And this is a really interesting one as well that service providers don't like to see. Why are you using your current service provider? Well, a lot of folks said it's the only option available. So I guess actually service providers will be happy to see that because we're actually doing their jobs really well. We see a lot of folks saying that because of a bunch of different reasons, franchising agreements, non-compete issues, they're really the only option in town. We do get actually a fairly large number saying that they're happy with their current provider, which personally I was really surprised at. I know I'm not 100% happy with the provider that I have at home, and I was surprised that a lot of people are. Again, you see this kind of other category over here, and we're not really sure exactly what that was. We don't have the answers behind it, but it's interesting to see that a lot of folks have other reasons. This is a really good one to look at too. Do you favor or oppose using municipal funds to provide broadband access to existing and potential development? If you favor, would you be willing to pay higher or get higher fees or taxes to pay for it? A lot of folks oppose this, which is not surprising. They're not willing to pay for these broadband infrastructure, which is not a very surprising thing. There are some folks that prefer taxes. There are some. It's a very interesting graph to look at. I'll let you kind of come to your own conclusion about it, but something that we're talking about in that point as well. How much, if any, would you be willing to pay for faster internet speeds? That first item is winning by a large margin is nothing. I would not want to pay anything more for faster internet speeds. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is making technology cheaper. So we'll see how we can do that. Then we'll review our public involvement process. I'll talk about the last one first because that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to have this kind of rich dialogue among stakeholders when it's broadband, and both educate and inform attendees about the New Hampshire broadband mapping and planning program. We had a great forum last year. This is a pretty good turnout tonight as well, which I'm really happy about. So we're really excited about that one. Sector-based interviews, I mentioned this before. I know some folks might not have been here. These are the one-on-one interviews with sector professionals in healthcare, public safety, education, those different areas, talking with them about what the conditions are in their sector, what the barriers are to broadband, and what the needs are for broadband. It's very interesting things there. Next is our broadband stakeholder group meetings. We've had those for the last 3 years. They're on a quarterly basis, and that's the group that we've been working on to develop the regional Strafford regional broadband. We review those public involvement processes. Then we'll go into our data collection efforts. There are a couple different ones here. Mapping verification I put first because we've already talked about it. That's our field checking broadband and meeting one-on-one with municipal leaders to talk about what things they may have heard about where service may or may not be. And really this is an effort to improve our existing broadband availability data sets. Next, you might remember that map I showed you with all the different points on it. That was our community anchor institution database survey. And what we've been doing there again is calling these places, asking them what their broadband availability is, what quality they're getting, and getting back those results and actually creating this map and data set. In 2011, we did a small effort to collect Wi-Fi points, so public Wi-Fi locations around the state, and we have quite a few of those in our region, and that data will be integrated as well with your plan. And last, this is an effort we did last year to collect all cable franchise agreements on a statewide level, do kind of an analysis of those, point out some attributes like how many PEG access channels you need to be getting, how much funding you get in with your channels or your cable franchise agreement. We did an analysis of those, and that's actually present online and can be used by communities at any time. And those will all be included as part of our data contract. I just wanted to give kind of a sampling of some of the barriers that we've heard through all of our conversations with the public involved in the process. I won't read through them all, but a couple I'd like to kind of outline that are interesting. Obviously, population density in some of our more rural regions is really, really challenging because service providers aren't willing to provide services in the areas. And that kind of fits the next one in the economic barriers, which is lack of economic sustainability for rural service providers. Those are pretty much the same thing, actually, just said in a little bit different way. And unfortunately, that's something we can't do a whole lot about. If a company doesn't see a big ROI on their investment, then it's going to be a challenge. Again, there's kind of a lack of understanding or interest from the public in leveraging better service from the providers. And specifically what I mean there is citizen groups getting together, maybe negotiating with providers to get service extended to their area, whether it be a subdivision that wants a fiber installation. I think the citizen groups actually have a tremendous amount of power there, and it's not something we've taken advantage of yet. I hope to see citizens doing it in the future. Some of the administrative barriers, these kind of get to the cable franchise agreements. Really what they do is they turn geographic boundaries into service boundaries, where the boundary of the town actually turns into kind of the stop of the line, which is really challenging. You might have a Comcast and a MetroCast coming together, and those houses in the middle might not be served. That's something we've actually seen in a lot of our mapping efforts. And of course, there's a lack of incentives for the ISPs or internet service providers to compete against one another in franchise communities. There's a lot of administrative challenge there. Obviously, the technology typology, and what I mean by that, which is kind of a technical term, cable, DSL, fiber, those types of technology are limited by geography. Obviously, DSL can be extended for long distances. Repeaters can be installed to extend that technology, but there's a lot of challenge there. And we're seeing that in some of our mapping results, where DSL just simply can't be extended to a certain area because it's beyond the range. Those are some of the barriers we run into in some of the meetings. And some of the needs, this one first really gets to one of the points I made a second ago about informing citizens about what the advantages are to higher capacity connections, what they could be doing if they had better service, faster speeds. One thing we kind of like to do is increase low-cost connection opportunities for both rural and urban customers. I'd say it's a different way and just say that we'd like to make better technologies more affordable. Something that we can't control directly, but it's something we're going to talk about in the plan. Because some areas of the country are actually able to do this to create this amazing. We'd like to see some type of method to incentivize ISPs to compete against one another. If you know anything about this, it's not something that's going to happen really soon, but it's something that could happen in the future. Obviously, with those franchising agreements, it makes it a little more difficult when your cable is thrown across a line, and then the other company wants to come in and wants to use that line, but has to rent it from the first company. So it's a very complicated process, but we'd like to create some method to incentivize that competition. This general needs area at the end here, we would really like to do a better job of informing communities about rural telecommunications development grants. They're out there. There aren't as many around right now, but a couple of years ago they were actually really popular, and communities did different things with them. One thing that a lot of them have done is done this kind of public-private partnership, which we have some case studies actually prepared in our plan about that. Another thing we'd like to do is kind of increase this promotion and education of high-capacity wireless broadband infrastructure in addition to wired installations and fiber. This is something that came out of the last regional broadband forum. We had a really robust discussion about, well, what about wireless? We've heard that it's changing the landscape in the future, and it is. It no doubt is, but I think one of the challenges we're working with right now is we don't know exactly what it's going to do in the future, what wireless, basically large-scale Wi-Fi is going to look like. So we're trying to make some statements about that, but with a lack of real technical expertise and really the inside track on a lot of those technologies, it's difficult for us to know exactly what it's going to do for a region like the Strafford region. But we are going to talk about that. These are two sections that aren't yet completed in the plan. I've mentioned the second one, goals and implementation. That's something we're going to be kind of hashing out over the next year. Also, what we're going to be working on is talking about those different sectors I mentioned before, part of our sector-based interview process, talking about some of the needs and possible solutions to the challenges and concerns that we've had, that we've run into during those interviews. That will be a section we'll be working on, particularly this fall, but also next spring, 2014. This is an interesting section because I could talk probably a couple hours about these different tendencies. I'll do a quick run through right now, but this is going to be a lot of content at the very end of the document. We're going to do a glossary because that's really important. There are a lot of terms related to broadband technology that folks might not be familiar with yet. And we need to explain what exactly those mean. Similarly, abbreviations. We will use some abbreviations because some of these terms are very, very long and kind of unwieldy. So we will begin to abbreviate things in the document, which is something we don't love to do here, but we need to really in this document to save length, basically. So we'll have those abbreviations defined in the end of the document. In addition, we'll have kind of this technology section where we'll talk about what is DSL, what is fiber, what is wireline, what is wireless technology, what is WiMAX. We'll actually go through and talk about what those different things are, what their limitations are, what the possibilities are as well. Next, we'll have this UNH Cooperative Extension Training Module. This is really kind of something that they'll be delivering to us that it talks about putting your business on the digital map, putting your community on the digital map. That'll be delivered to us. In addition, we'll have meeting minutes from each of these forums, as well as minutes from our sector-based interviews and also our broadband stakeholder meetings. So if you're wondering about whether your comment was included, maybe check back, they'll be in there. We'll have an FAQ. This should only be about 10 questions long. It's going to be kind of general about what the plan can do, what it can't do, and we'll have that in there. We'll have a section on cell tower site. This is something that's really interesting for a lot of communities. Wireless telecommunications, not in the sense necessarily of broadband, but wireless telecommunications in general is something that a lot of communities have grappled with from time to time, personal wireless facilities. We'll have a little section on that, what communities can do, maybe a model ordinance in there, but that's something that hasn't quite been completed yet. We'll also talk about the cable franchise agreement inventory that we completed last year. We'll have an in-depth discussion about how we did that, what the results are, how you can use it in the future. Next, we'll talk about this effort that's going on at UNH right now. It's actually a really new, exciting one, so I can't say too much about it, but there's actually going to be a broadband center of excellence at UNH, which is going to be headed by the inventor of the cable modem. So they've got a really strong person really heading this effort. They're putting together a center to educate legislators about broadband and what it can do in this state and also in kind of the New England region as well. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the technicity, and the technicity really goes with this intelligent transportation system. The two of these are really about how broadband will impact our urban and rural communities in the future. How will we monitor traffic? How will we look at intelligent transportation systems in the future using broadband technologies? We're already seeing these things. We're seeing intelligent road signs on the highways in the state and things like that. That is a result of a broadband connection and an intelligent transportation system. What's the future of that? We want to know. And we at least want to talk about it. Data casting is it's a public safety tool for transmitting data across the state. Something we do want to discuss because obviously public safety is of huge importance to what we do here and to everyone in the region. We'll talk about what data casting is doing and changing for public safety communications and emergencies in the future. Lastly, we'll talk a little bit about these community center Wi-Fi networks. We actually have a case study in the region that we'll talk about where a community has funded a Wi-Fi network in its downtown area that's free to all users. Obviously a great way of bringing people in, tourism-wise, to bring people in to sit at the cafe, go on their computer, check their email when they're traveling. We have a case study, and we'd like to see other communities in the region implement something similar to it. And that will be hopefully the last of the things we'll talk about. So that's really all I had today. Obviously, love to hear your comments later in the meeting and questions as well at the end of the meeting, or just in the afternoon. But thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Any members have any questions, comments? Matt?
Thanks, Matt, for your presentation. Who funded this?
So this was funded through a rural utility service grant. It's NTIA as well. It's federally funded.
Did you cover anything about using satellite coverage?
Satellite coverage. So
Satellite broadband, is that ever mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually accounted for that. There was actually a data collection effort. So I'll answer this. there was actually a data collection effort on the statewide level that proved essentially to be too costly for us to pursue. And what that was an effort to identify how many users in the region were using satellite dishes. Well, how do you do that? It's hard. It's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what you have. The service provider is not going to tell you. We know that there's a big population out there with that, especially in our northern communities, some of those kind of mobile wireless installations, and we've tried to account for it in our mapping data. So when you look at that mapping data, you'll see a category in there that does have a wireless name to it, and that is mostly satellite technology. There's a mobile terrestrial wireless and a fixed terrestrial wireless. Fixed terrestrial wireless is what you don't account for in that mapping data. So we did account for it, but we didn't do that field data collection effort to go out and actually look at all the satellite dishes in there. It just would have been too costly.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thanks, Matt.
Before I go any further, I apologize to the public. We have a sign-in clipboard here in case you guys want to sign in. And all right. Moving on. Progress report on water infrastructure, appendix for Strafford Regional Planning. Kyle Pimentel, Senior Regional Planner. Kyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do you follow up a draft broadband plan presentation? So I'm going to do my best to go through it. But similar to Matt, my role here tonight is to give you guys and members of the public an update on a project that we're working on. And this particular project is the water infrastructure appendix for our regional master plan update. There are a number of different components that are going to go into the regional master plan, but tonight we're going to focus on water infrastructure. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are some key facts about New Hampshire as a whole, as far as where we are with our infrastructure, the purpose of water infrastructure planning, a little bit of a timeline, the content outline, where we are as far as chapter writing, some of the data collection that we've already done, some of the maps that we've already produced, and some other planning efforts and regional initiatives that are taking place already throughout the region. So before I get into the infrastructure chapter writing, these are just a few facts to just keep in mind. The American Society of Civil Engineers every 4 years produces a report, and they look at America's infrastructure. And what they deem for New Hampshire is what you see on this slide. This is just looking at water and environment. There are other components. There's transportation, public facilities, and energy. But for this purpose, we're going to focus on water and environment. Overall, the state got a C. That's better than the country. The country got a D+ as far as what their infrastructure needs are. And that's really evaluated on capacity, condition, funding, the funding needed, and operation and maintenance. So looking at this slide, our dams are a C-, wastewater C-. Levees is included, but we didn't have a grade for it. Hazardous waste is a C, and drinking water is a C as well. So to go back a little bit, like I said before, this report comes out every 4 years. And looking at how we're doing, for the most part, we've stayed about the same. Dams have stayed the same a little bit. It's got downgraded a little bit in drinking water. Hazardous waste has stayed the same. Same thing for wastewater. It's gone down a little bit. To touch on a few key notes, why dams is maybe a C-. For the entire state, we have the safety program for dams about 8.5 people, and they oversee approximately 98 dams apiece. We have 106 high hazard dams in the state. 11 of them are in our planning region. A good stat that's in there is 93% of those state regulated dams have an emergency action plan if something were to ever happen. I would imagine that when the report comes out in 2015, that 93% will be probably even closer to 100. That's something that a lot of emergency management directors in local communities are really adamant about, is having those action plans in place for those dams. And another thing to consider is that there's $852,000 funded to the state dam safety program. Drinking water, as far as what their report is saying, they're saying about $847 million in needs over the next 20 years for the state. Hazardous waste, there are about 20 sites on the national priorities list. Levees, it doesn't really fit for our planning region, but we do have approximately 4 miles, according to FEMA's midterm inventory. And wastewater, again, 1.2 million wastewater dollars over the next 20 years is what they're putting out there. Again, we'll see what the difference is and how New Hampshire is graded in 2015. Some of these may go up, they may go down. We're not really sure. So what is the purpose of our planning for water infrastructure? The first one is aging. You know, we've, as a country, as a state, you know, right down to the local level, you know, we've invested a lot of money in building a network of drinking water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure to make sure that we provide our public with safe and clean water. A lot of those investments, wastewater treatment plants, distribution lines, sewer lines, they're aging. And some of them are coming to a point where they're reaching their end of their life cycle. They need to be upgraded, repaired. There's constant maintenance, and these things all need to be addressed. Another issue is we're in a growing population, and the seacoast, or if you want to say more general, the southeastern part of the state is the fastest growing. And it's this part of the state that's more likely to push the limits of future water sources. And we're not just talking about quantity, but we also want to make sure that that water is clean. And we're not spending a ton of money on treatment. We also want to look at environmental protection, making sure that our environment is taken care of because it plays such a key role, you know, in our state's economy, which there's a few slides at the end that'll talk about that, and just as individuals and communities. And lastly, to make sure that we're balancing long-term implications, things that are out 15, 20 years, with short-term needs that we need to do and take care of right now. So a little bit about a timeline. These first 4 are the overarching timeline for the project. So this is referring to the update to our regional master plan. This project has started back in February of 2012. We started our outreach in September of that year. We went out, engaged citizens at local events like Apple Harvest Day, Northwood's Beanhole Bash, New Market's Heritage Festival, things like that. We've been around a few flood donor places to gauge what people really like about the region. What would they like to change? Things like that. So that started in September. We hope to have a draft plan in place by June of next year, and the completion date is December of next year. That's a little misleading as far as, and Matt sort of mentioned this with the broadband plan, we're no longer able to bill any money after 2014. But this is something that needs to be adopted by the commission, so they're probably going to have to hold off until either the January or probably more realistically, the May meeting in 2015. Same thing with the broadband, although we can't bill any more money to this, if we need to make corrections from comments and everything like that, we'll be able to do it. To now focus a little bit on just the water chapter and where we are and how that lines up. We finished our draft outline in May. We brought that to all the other regional planning commissions. I also sent it out to members that worked at Public Works, city engineers for their feedback on what they would like to see in a plan like this and what sort of guidance they could give us. We also organized our first technical subcommittee. We held our first meeting in June where they basically gave us the go-ahead with the outline, and they thought that it was what they had envisioned. And they said, move forward. We started chapter writing this July, and our first review is going to be December of this year, or the goal is to have our first review in December. So this is a summary of the outline that we have right now. It's a lot longer than this, but for the case of a presentation, trim it down a little bit. You have your standard introduction, vision. We'll have an executive summary of existing conditions, which is basically a snapshot of the entire appendix. We'll look at things like protecting water resources, looking at point sources, non-point sources, and stormwater, other protection measures, public drinking water, what sort of existing drinking water sources are out there, existing infrastructure, future supplies, projections on demand. Same with wastewater, what's already there, some of the future challenges that we may have, projections on demand. Also, what sort of role does emergency management and public safety play in water infrastructure? Fire aids, resiliency. We'll also look at our dams and economic impacts. And at the end, there'll be a section for strategies and recommendations, some actions, either maybe showing some case studies or success stories that we've had throughout the region. And basically what we want this to be is a repository of as much information as possible for communities to use. The data metrics, we're talking about maps, tables, GIS layers. We can look at things like, and we've already done it and we'll see some of this, impervious coverage and how that plays a role, or how many people are on sewer, or how many people are on public water, or how many people are on private wells. We're going to have that all in one place so communities can look at it when they need to start the conversation, how they're going to address their water infrastructure needs. So in chapter writing, this is we've gotten here already. We've got a little bit of an introduction. We have a vision statement which has been looked over and it changed a number of different times, but I think that we've got one that everyone's comfortable with. And the reason that I put this map on the right-hand side is I think a lot of our communities, sometimes in the northern side, forget or don't realize that they're in the Great Bay coastal watershed. They don't necessarily sometimes feel as though that they are, but according to what is considered the HUC-8, which is the hydrologic unit code, mostly if you live in our planning region, you're in the Great Bay coastal watershed. So I know that sometimes can be misleading, and sometimes it's easier to see it on a map. So we've also started defining what protecting water resources means and what sort of pollutants are out there. To break these down, we're looking at conventional, toxic, and non-conventional. And these are things like, for conventional, these are things like biochemical oxygen demand, pH, total suspended solids, fecal coliform, oil and grease. On the toxic side, you're looking at metals and man-made organic compounds. The non-conventional are the ones that don't fit into either of those categories. So you're talking about ammonia, nitrogen, phosphorus, things like that. And then we've also touched upon point source pollution. And that's basically, it's discharges from one place, which is, these are a lot easier to sort of pick out than the non-point sources. Point sources, you're looking at wastewater treatment plants, or treatment works, industrial facilities, stormwater discharges that are associated with industrial activity, destruction, and urban runoff. One thing that we've already started to do, and this is pretty much completed, is we've categorized or inventoried all of our point sources in the region. And this is not all of them, but for this slide, you can see what's in Dover and parts of Durham. But we've got an entire list of every point source in our region. Whether or not they have a permit or not, when that permit was issued, and the date of expiration. So this may be something, for instance, if you wanted to look at Dover. Dover has 3 unpermitted discharges at the moment, maybe 4. So that might be something that they look into. But this is just another part of our data collection. Also what we're doing as far as inventorying, we want to take a snapshot of our wastewater treatment facilities. Where are they? How old are they? So this is one write-up that we received from Rochester. We asked the Public Works Department to supply us with a little bit of information about how old is the facility, how much can it handle, what sort of upgrades have you already made, what sort of upgrades do you think you're going to need for the future? And we hope to have all 8 of them completed. We've got information from Rochester, Durham, and Dover. We're waiting on the other 4. But this basically gives you a snapshot what Rochester has already done and some of the upgrades that they've done to be proactive using the latest technology. And we're hoping if we have this out there, if communities are struggling with what they can do, maybe they can look at a city like Rochester or Somersworth. They may be able to say, well, this is working for them. Maybe we can make similar upgrades. Now, getting away from the point source, it gets a little more tricky when you're talking about non-point, because basically that's having no well-defined point of entry. You're talking about contamination of surface and groundwater supplies through a number of different ways, and those could be excess fertilizer, herbicides, from agricultural lands, oil and grease, sediment, salt from irrigation practices, or probably more in the case for us, salt from de-icing, bacteria and nutrients from livestock pet waste, things like that are all non-point sources that are very, very hard to pinpoint. The other, which is the biggest, primary source of our non-point pollution, is stormwater runoff. And that's basically generated when it rains or when there's snow melt. It hits any piece of land that's not soil or it's not part of the natural landscape. So we're talking about building rooftops, pavement, impervious surfaces. It takes any contaminants that's on there and it discharges it to our lakes, rivers, wetlands, or underground storage. Stormwater runoff is a huge issue, and it will continue to be an issue for us as we continue to develop. This will be something that communities need to address. So this is sort of the big looming elephant in the room, if you will, is the NPDES Phase 2, which is more commonly known as the MS4 permits that are going to come out. EPA have been in draft form for I don't know how long, but for a while. And we don't know exactly when they're going to be introduced, but it is going to have an impact on our communities. There are different phases, and there are different permits. One phase, you can specifically look at wastewater treatment plants. They have, if they're discharging to a U.S. water body, they need a permit. There's also stormwater, in which if you're located in an urbanized area, you now fall within an MS4 area. And that has changed since the last census, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But you can definitely get lost in the weeds on this as far as what it means to be an urbanized area and what it doesn't mean. To give you an idea of what it looks like for our region, this is a map from 2000 to 2010 of our urbanized area comparison. And on the left are the communities that are designated MS4 areas. Now, we do have communities like Barrington, Lee, Madbury, who did put in for a waiver to not be included, and they all did receive one. So they're not going to have to adhere to the new MS4 permits that come out. But the rest of those communities are going to have to. And if you see anything that's in the light purple on here, so if you're looking in Rochester, this is all the area that has been an MS4 in 2000. The darker purple is what was added. And the hash, the crosshatches, is what was removed. So, one thing to note is this piece of Rollinsford that is now out of an urbanized area, that doesn't mean that they don't have to adhere to the MS4 permit anymore. Once you're considered an urbanized area, you are an urbanized area forever. And you will always have to adhere to the MS4 permits. They can never get smaller. They can only get larger. And it is solely based on these areas, which is based on the census. So we'll be paying attention to this because it's going to have an impact on our communities. I know that there have been a few that haven't had to ever adhere to these permits, but they do now. So we'll see as communities grow and as the census comes out, how far these start to extend, but it is something that communities should be aware of. If you do want to know more information on how these tracks were delineated, it's really hard to explain, and I would take questions afterward. I can do the best I can, but it's really it's a complicated model that the Census Bureau takes into account. But again, this just shows where we are and what communities are going to be affected. Getting into some of the data sets that we're working on, we've got some impervious surface coverage data, and this is basically going to be used to make sure that communities have a better understanding of what the associated effects of development are, with increased stormwater runoff that can lead to reduced water quality, degrading our aquatic habitats, things like that. So in the plan, we're going to provide additional information on the effects of impervious surfaces, any documented studies that have been done in the region. The big one is called Impervious Surfaces on Coastal New Hampshire and Southern York County, Maine, which was done in 2010. But we do have some good data that goes back 30 years on how we have grown as far as impervious coverage is concerned. This is a table looking back from 1990. We have each of our communities, their total acreage, what their acreage of impervious coverage was in 1990, that percentage, 2000, 2010, and the change over time. So we have seen an increase over time. For the entire region, since 1990, we've gone from about 9% impervious to about 14.9. So it's almost about a 5% change over 30 years. We wanted to be able to show this. So for this presentation, this is a picture of Nottingham. And this is the impervious coverage in 1990. And this is what it looks like in 2010. We have all this information. We're hoping that it will be useful to communities to see how they're going, where they are. So again, from 1990 to 2010. It's a pretty decent amount. But if communities want, we have this map for our region, but if communities want site-specific maps or something zoomed in on an area, they can certainly have it. The data has been put together. Another data set that we're working on that we hope that communities find useful is to look at restoration activities for some of our impaired waters. This is something that the Department of Environmental Services put together, and using a tool, they basically look at the ecological stressor and social characteristics of each watershed to decide what is the likelihood of maintaining water quality if there was a restoration effort to take place. So if you're going to put in limited amounts of resources, where are you going to put them? Where are those rivers most likely to rebound? So this was a recovery analysis that was completed, and what we did is we just clipped it out for our region, and this just shows a few different places in our region. The first is for our rivers, and out of 418 impaired places along our rivers, we have 67 in our region. But we do have the #1 recovery in the state, which is the Oyster River and Caldwell Brook in Barrington. Same thing with lakes. There were 156 impaired lakes in the state. We have 11 in our region, but we have the #2 recovery site at Tuckaway in Nottingham. So again, this is more or less a tool for communities to use if they do want to address a problem area. If they know that they have a few impaired waters in their community, this could say, well, maybe we want to, if we're going to allocate any money, choose the one that's most likely to recover, and not one that doesn't stand a chance, or that's going to be a lot harder, maybe to pick from some of the low-hanging fruit. But again, it's here as a tool. To look at some of the planning efforts and regional initiatives that have been going on in our region, these are just a few on the local level. Newmarket has done a new water ordinance. They adopted an aquifer and wellhead protection district. It basically takes into account all of their stratified river aquifer areas. They put in some best management practices, things like that they thought were important. The city of Somersworth adopted low-impact development and stormwater regulations, which is for their site plans. And basically they wanted to promote development that minimized land disturbance and to sort of preserve those natural areas. The city of Rochester had a project a few years ago restoring water quality in the Willow Brook watershed. There were 2 pilot locations. One was in an area next to a small K-4 neighborhood school. From what I read about it, it was through the Chico River Watershed Coalition and the Rochester DPW were heavily involved. They installed some rain gardens, a dry well, roof drains. There was a porous asphalt basketball court that was donated by Pike Industries. So it was a really successful project. The other one being a recently built subdivision. New catch basins and gutters to handle stormwater. The last one that we put on here was Wakefield. They were having some problems with Lovell Lake with phosphorus and sediment runoff, and it was lowering their water quality through Lovell Lake. And they worked with the Acton Wakefield Watershed Alliance along with the UNH Stormwater Center, and they came up with a road management plan for Brackett and Pond roads, as they figured those were the 2 roads that were supplying most of the runoff that was leading to lower water quality in Lovell Lake. And one green initiative is the green infrastructure for New Hampshire communities, which is going on right now. They finished phase 1 last year. They chose 3 projects. They're Portsmouth, Exeter, and Stratham. Phase 2 is coming up right now. Applications are actually due November 5th. There was a press release that we put out if any community is interested, so long as they're in the coastal watershed, which most of our communities are. We had 2 apply last year. Dover applied and Rochester did apply. They weren't chosen, but I know that I'm not sure. I think both communities are going to apply. They're probably only going to choose 3 more communities to implement anything, but if anyone is interested, from communities, please let me know, because the application is finalized and it's out there. But basically what they're looking at is either a structural or non-structural project. Structural being bio-retention ponds, rain gardens, tree filters, pervious pavement, or if a community wants to do something like non-structure and come up with an LID ordinance or some sort of source control measure, that is worth it too. It depends on what the community wants to do. We can talk about the importance of water infrastructure until we're blue in the face, but sometimes we really need to see it as far as dollars and what that means. And this was a study that was done in 2007. It's called the economic impact of potential decline in New Hampshire water quality, the link between visitors' perceptions, usage, and spending. And according to this report, New Hampshire's economy, about $379 million in total sales are generated by freshwater fishing, boating, and swimming, which is 26% of summer spending. And that number would be even higher if it took into account saltwater, but it doesn't. And one of the things it focused on was what would happen to the sales if conditions are perceived to decline. And those conditions consist of water clarity and purity, water levels and flows, natural views and scenery, and crowding. And they asked people, would you come back? Would you come back to these same sites? And when they did their analysis for the seacoast tourism region, it would be about 6.2 million lost. But the big one, and the biggest one in the entire state, is the lakes region, which is about 64.2 million in loss, just from people's perception that the water isn't the same. And that's why they come here. So sometimes, to put things in context on why water resources and water infrastructure is so important, is how much we rely on it. And I thought that these numbers can sometimes stand out and make us realize how important this is and how to make this work, especially when it comes to writing a plan like this, worth it, and that it make it worth it for our communities to use it So when it comes to them making decisions, they've got the best data that there is. And that's all I have. If there are any questions from the commissioners, I'll try to answer the questions.
Any questions for Carl?
I have a question. Carl, how do you address the issue of septic systems and how the problems with them can be addressed? Because definitely that economic connection is so clear for a town like Northwood and others. And we don't have, it's not like we can upgrade our wastewater treatment plant. We've got septic system issues.
That's a tough one. We actually haven't gotten into the septic water systems yet, but a lot of communities are struggling with that. There are opportunities for instance, I'll use an example of Durham. Potentially, if they have decided that there's an area in town that they believe they have leaky septic systems, that's contributing directly to nitrogen that's going into the Great Bay. You know, if there is a transportation project or there's a construction project that's near them where they can somehow tie those people into their system, their municipal system, and get them off private sewers, maybe that's an option. I mean, to go in and to do analysis and find out if people are having leaks in their septic system is going to be impossible. There's going to need to be water quality monitoring, things like that. But as far as where we are now in chapter writing, we haven't even touched that yet. You know, but as soon as that stuff comes available, I know we're probably going to lean on the Department of Environmental Services and what they think, and find out what maybe other communities are doing throughout the state to address this, or maybe even throughout the country. What are people doing to look at that? But right now, we haven't gotten there.
Kyle, was this information compiled with partnership with the Water Sustainability Commission?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, this information seems very similar to the report that the Water Sustainability Commission, I was just wondering, is some of this information compiled from them?
Yes, yeah. There is, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to as far as what parts of it, but there are similar concerns that the Water Commission, that report that was produced is reflected here.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question if you would mind. Sure. Could you flip back the page?
Yep.
These figures, maybe I missed something, but I don't think so. But pay close attention. The Seacoast Tourism Region estimated loss of the Lake Tourism Region estimated loss. Over what time period are those figures in effect for? 1 year, 10 years, 5 years? What's that?
That's a good question. I'm not.
It makes a big difference.
It's a big difference. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the time frame was.
So then without that information, it's an invalid estimate or study.
They do put it. I just didn't put it on my slide.
Oh, okay.
It is available. It's just I didn't put it on this slide. But I can certainly get it to you because the report is available.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. They look at a number of different scenarios, but
How
they
they
do.
compiled is one thing. I'm just curious over what time.
It is, yeah. And I should have put what time frame it was. I don't know if it's 1 to 5 or 5 to 10 or 1 to 10. I'm not sure, but it is there.
Thank you.
How you doing? I'm just curious.
Can you state your name, please?
Yeah, it's Fred Leonard from Rochester. The stormwater runoff is a particular interest in me because earlier this year, I felt that I would be in favor of the state of Virginia against the EPA, and said that the EPA will overstep its authority to kind of regulate stormwater. It's the Clean Water Act, stormwater isn't covered. So I keep hearing at the city council level here in Rochester, I heard it tonight about how these unless working are going to have to comply with the standard of regulations or level call. And And by the way, the EPA didn't appeal that. So it seems to me that, I don't know why we're talking about that. I'm not saying that it's not wise to be concerned about stormwater, because I think, maybe you can figure that out. Like, things going into our regular place out, drinking water supply, and all those kinds of things that we don't want to go into. So we need to be, pay attention to, certainly at the local level, and handing out tools to the planning board for different construction projects and so forth. So I don't, you said that communities are going to have to comply. According to a federal judge, no, we don't. That's not been appealed. And it seems to me like everyone's getting all spun up about, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's great to talk about studying and everything else, but we don't know where the money's going to come from. To comply with rules that federal judge says we don't have to comply with.
Now, and that could be, and I would have to go look this up, but the MS4 permits on certain states, they're administered sometimes by the state. For New Hampshire, it's administered by the EPA. We're one of the few, there's not many. Most states are not administered by the EPA. And as far as I know, communities are going to have to comply in that. There may have been another ruling in another state. But as far as I know, the stormwater MS4 for New Hampshire, communities are going to have to adhere to that.
Unless it's fought for,
Unless it's
whatever,
fought.
there's obviously precedence for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the concern I have is not so much that we shouldn't do, what we should do in our meetings to try to prevent, more food from our water bodies and water supply. But we have to go to the extent of applying standards that are likely stringent in all reality, done on kind of a cookie cutter basis, similar to the nitrogen issues with the point source permits that are being issued. It's all modeling done from some other community somewhere, and they just kind of cookie cutter and then they move on. So I think that, from my perspective, it's something that you ought to be cautious about. This planning board ought to be cautious about. All these numbers, it's unrealistic. Wouldn't it be wiser to, and it is unrealistic, nobody has this number, wouldn't it be wiser to take the approach that, we think we can do this much with the resources we have, focus on that, rather than say, well, we have this, hundreds of millions of dollars, we're never going to have that. So I think that'll be better.
Yeah, and I mean, to speak to that, I know that the communities that have been in the MS4 area for years, for years, they've been doing all this stuff anyway. It's the communities that are being brought into it now that have never had an MS4 stormwater permit. Most of these communities, they haven't done anything yet because they don't know, they haven't seen it yet. They've never had one before. So some of what we're going to talk about and write about is for the communities that are starting from scratch. A city like Dover, they're being proactive. A city like Rochester, they're being proactive too. Dover's making upgrades to their wastewater treatment facility slowly because they know they can't get down to that 0.3 EPA wants them to get to, but they're going to come down from 12 to 8 to 10 or something like that over time. So that they're doing exactly what you're talking about because it's unrealistic to get down to 0.3. It's impossible. But what they're doing is now that they're making upgrades, they're considering, well, we know that the new permit's coming, so we're going to at least invest a little bit more to come down a little bit. But you're right, to get to the 0.3 is impossible. But I think that's what communities are going to need to do, is to sort of do that small steps. But the bigger picture is for the communities that have never experienced it.
That's a good explanation. I believe Mr. Orkin.
Just in terms of a process, I think this kind of dialogue is good, and I think that's what we set aside agenda item number 5 for. just because I suffered from a cold and whatnot, I may have to leave before the end of the meeting, but I wanted to make sure that I was here at least for the agenda items that I need to participate in. So we can go on to number 4 and then come back to some
Right,
discussion.
gentlemen, just wait till we get down to the citizens forum, then you can jump in again. That's okay? All right. Item 4, Strafford Regional Planning Commission, 2013 Commissioner's Handbook. Carolyn's been handing them out. Members, come in.
Members that work here will email.
Okay.
And, well, it's been noted that under executive committee listing, that I inadvertently had Logan Connor listed as an alternate, and that is incorrect. However, it's been to the publisher, so I can't change it in the book, but I will let everyone know.
Okay, now I'm going to jump down to Citizens Forum. Citizens of the Strafford region are invited to speak only to agenda items. Statements shall be limited to 3 minutes. And I invite the public to speak. Remind them there's only a 3-minute limit and no obscenities. So the gentleman on the back, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, sorry.
Hi, my name is Lou Archibald, I live in Rochester. And this is a letter I sent in to several newspapers around, passing around. You haven't heard what I read what I had said, but this is what I put in the paper, basically. The board of citizens of Strafford County, we own property, maintain the property, pay taxes to the city, state, federal government, equal one. And so I would say this, the Strafford County regional planning may be rummaging around the property when it is expected, even when you're not around. An article by State Representative Comeau advises that the planning committees are answerable to no one. It is an ad hoc agency and it's out of control. That is not original planning, it came from the usurp land rights of citizens incrementally one agenda Act 21, Chapter 42, social engineering, perennial form, contemptuous social agenda of the time. One afternoon, several people drove next to my property. A vehicle was unfamiliar, so I checked it out. They were University of New Hampshire students in the Strafford County Regional Plan. The vehicle, they weren't lost. They were there to check the drainage culverts on my property. I am not happy with this project and reflects on my property rights as a citizen. One mentioned the possibility of poor drainage while checking the culvert on my property. There had not been any rain, so there wasn't any water. I gave them a short summary of where the water resources come from, up the hill, down the hill, under the road, down past through my property, into a regular hole that goes under some people's houses, across the street, into a little stream. I was polite and helpful, I thought. One of the students then mentioned the city of Rochester would be advised to clear the vegetation around my culvert. I cleaned my culvert yearly and have done so for the 27 years I've lived there. Second, the city has no business cleaning anything on my property. The same person tells me the triangular stone that was down there since I moved here is restricting the flow of water. A major bridge was destroyed in 2006 on this road by Route 202 a few years ago. And this stone was in place then. Water that strong would have certainly have moved such a small stone. There was never restricted water flow, and hearing this nonsense yet again, they lowered it off my property. That stone was in place before that gentleman was even born. I have to ask the following question, and these questions are not rhetorical. It is not for me alone that I ask this. This requires clear, objective response to what you are doing to the citizens of Strafford County. To include any means of control, be it fines, fees, or taxes. Under what authority does the Strafford County Regional Planning Group operate? Whose authority does Regional Planning designate these students or anyone else to go onto private property? Under whose authority do these students think they can delegate work to city workers on private property? What benefits are being seen by the county and its residents? Please outline and list the return on investment to the citizenry. Other than grant money, that is our money to start with. Tax money or anything, it's all our money. Make public and provide all monetary transactions since initiating this endeavor. How is looking at my culvert on my property going to help the county? On a side note, Park and Ride, the base of the new housing development on 2 through 202 across from Lowe's. Well, they're building a park and ride. Apparently they continue well below what I consider to be a level playing field for a parking lot. Well, guess what? They finally hit water, and the pit is now filled with water. What is the impact on the neighborhood? Will it now simply be backfilled? Is this legal? Who owns this? Furthermore, well, I'm just wondering if the UNH scuba team will take a dive down it to locate the main source. At this point, this looks more like intellectual welfare than an organization that is looking to improve the lives and prosperity of the citizens. This is yet again the regional planning group was pushing Agenda 21, which in this city and many others around here have voted not to participate. These grants only go to expand power and features. Your rights and freedoms are of no concern to them. I didn't serve my country in the military and give up any of my rights to a totally socialist agenda. Even if I had not served, I would be just as outraged. I am not one of your vassals who is willing to enter into any agreement with the Lord or any monarch. I am not a subject to any king of Israel.
How much?
I just have one more sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
Strafford County members and associates, stay off my property. Should any of you or any others be associated with this, come on my property, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll risk you this.
Sure.
Yep. Have a nice evening.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Guy in the back, stood up.
Hi, my name is Greg DeNoble. I live in Rochester, and I have some different comments regarding the different cases tonight. There was mention of broadband stakeholders. Is there any information as to who these people are? Are they people, companies, organizations? And I'd like to have an idea of who the stakeholders are. Is it MetroCast? Is it Fairpoint?
Sure. So the stakeholders it's a group of citizens and also municipal leaders, I would say. The service providers are actually not represented because as part of the project, the regional planning commissions are not intended to participate with the service provider directly. So the individuals that are on our regional broadband stakeholder group are actually just citizens. They do serve in some interesting capacities. Some work in economic development, some work in healthcare, some of those sectors that I outlined during my presentation, but it's really a mix of those different sectors that are present, but no telecommunications professionals.
But that's my next question.
Yep.
Who is it getting broadband? I mean, you mentioned running wires. I mean, if there are a lot of people not getting broadband, why aren't there here demanding? I mean, you know, a lot of the stuff you're putting out there, you make it sound like broadband is a constitutional right. You know, if I want faster broadband, I will get it. I will pay the money. I will pay them to run the wire in my house. You make it sound like everyone should get broadband $50 a month. It's a privilege, not a right. And it's, you know, it's not like it was 100 years ago when they were trying to get the mail service. People need food, water, and oxygen. Broadband is a privilege, not a right. And again, there's enough facilities allowing people to get broadband. Because you probably can't provide a list of 10 things that make people's lives better. Watching Netflix, people can enhance their life. I mean, people, yes, they submit resumes and job applications online. You go to the library and do that. You know, what you're talking about, I just don't see any benefit collectively. There's a reason why these companies don't put in high-speed internet into down a road with 4 people on 2 miles an hour. I mean, when MetroCast, the cable company came to Rochester, we had 6 houses on our road. You can mile up, you want it, we'll run it for you, it'll be about $2,500, 6 people for $100 a piece. That's how you do it, you let the private sector run it. I don't know what these people are trying to accomplish with this broadband initiative. It sounds like other than trying to make it for free for people, I don't see the benefit. I mean, I've got my phone here, I travel around, I do not use public Wi-Fi. I make sure my phone has enough data plan that I don't have to hang up. I mean, you're putting stuff out there that, I mean, you're on it. If you want stuff for people, they may or may not need it. I mean, can you tell us the benefits? And, you know, that type of thing. It's just outlandish at times what you're asking for. You know, the next thing is then you're gonna have to provide computers, tablets, et cetera. I mean, where does it end? You know, there are people that need this, that are so desperate. Please show me. Again, I don't know if you want to discuss this after my rant or not, but the other thing is, on to the water stuff. I would ask that, number one, you get the word out that you can't do one of the few states that's administered by the EPA. That should be your big point in graph. Like, you know, we're one of the few states. Why are we one of the few states? What are we going to do to change it? And that's another thing. You yourself, as a professional, said these requirements are barely achievable, if achievable. And again, you know, listening to this Brent-based stuff, they don't even know the benefits of them either. That's the stuff we should be doing. Showing the communities how to fight it. I mean, I don't want dirty water any more than anyone else does. But again, just because somebody comes up with a number, it doesn't mean it needs to be achieved or can be achieved. I mean, yeah, we like to put a man on Mars, and we do it eventually, but right now, it's not going to happen. We can't do it. That's the type of stuff I think we should be dealing with, as opposed to just collecting data. I mean, give us something for our tax dollars. Mr. Archibald said, what are you folks doing for us? I mean, that would be something we really want to see. And the other thing is, will the answers to his questions show up in the minutes of the next meeting, or will he send a certified letter with the responses? What can be expected from that? If the man has some really valid questions, you're the very body who's asked it to get the response. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Tom Kaczynski from Rochester. I was just thinking about that presentation on the water and the question from Northwood, and it said Northwood about the septic systems. I attended a Great Dane Coalition meeting in Rochester Opera House some months ago, and they rated septic systems as being one of the biggest problems with nitrogen. And if the EPA gets its tentacles out that way, I can't remember the exact figures, but it was several thousand, I'm sure over 10,000 per septic system. The modifications on it, you ought to check into that. It's pretty expensive figures there. And in that presentation, I thought it was pretty good with the lawyer. By his facts, the eelgrass is coming back a little bit. There's a problem with these 100-year storms. So this is pretty ridiculous if we're going to be agreeing to some crazy requirements, and that's not the problem. As the normal said, we don't want dirty water, we don't want dirty bodies. But if you're going to spend all this money and that is not going to solve it, it's pretty ridiculous. And I think, we ought to revolt against the EPA. I mean, who are they anyway? The forced communities in bankruptcy. I mean, Rochester, you're talking several $20 million. I mean, this is ridiculous. But I think rural communities ought to look into that cost of septic.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back, first time.
On the designated rainfall in Rochester, on the designated MS4 areas in the region, as total population and regulated population, what would the regulated population be?
The regulated population is what falls in the MS4 area. The population.
Also, like part of the town of Barrington, some time ago, I saw a TV program in Oregon about impervious surfaces, stormwater runoff and stuff. Does having rain barrels on the property help out, using that to water your lawn rather than running off the roof onto the street?
So, yes.
Also, I was wondering if, I can't remember when we dug up my street and replaced sewer systems and stuff, but I would think there would be a type of technology, piping kind of similar to the way they do septic systems, maybe with holes in them and a lot of gravel around to allow the water to seep out underneath the road or whatever, rather than all rushing to the river. Is there stuff out there like that, or?
That would be more of a public works engineering question.
Kyle, just, I am aware, from a planning perspective, of some places where they have done that with parking lots. They basically created a huge underground, would look like a septic system, except it's collecting stormwater. So I'm aware of that in terms of parking lots. Although from my perspective, I've not ever seen that talked about with respect to streets and public infrastructure. I think that's an interesting question. I don't know if
It just seems to me like, as we upgrade things, if there is some, or maybe somebody needs to be notified to start looking into that. Because we do want the water to go into the ground and filter rather than to the river.
Can I just add something? So, you know the Target Home Depot down at Greenland that has the impervious service and part of the parking lot? That also has the filtering system that Ken was just talking about. But there's also a reliance on the use of wetlands, whether they're man-made or natural, to do the final filtering before it goes into the stream or water body. So that would be, I think, a problem doing that with streets.
Yeah, I was
Because
wondering also,
part of the
maybe-
process is that final filtering, I understand
Yeah.
yes. But technology changes all the time. So it's a good thought to think about.
And speaking of, upgrades to streets and stuff, I remember Mr. Orphan talking about the curbing and stuff, collecting the water. And, I like my street with no curbing, so the cars on the side of the road. I think maybe we should change the way we grade our streets and make them look nice. Rather than put that expensive grade of curbing.
Thank you. That's a really good point, and I think, if you think about curbing, it does two different things. One is it provides vertical separation. In some places where you have pedestrians close to vehicles, that vertical separation is a safety issue. But there are a lot of places where curbs are only used to direct water, so it goes fast into a stormwater collection system and goes fast into a river. And there are, I think, a lot of places where that just simply was not necessary and could have been done and should be done in a different way. So I think the current thinking is, let's not just build curbs because they're pretty. If there's not the vertical separation, then really be thoughtful about whether or not it's necessary to direct that water, spend all that money on something that's got to be maintained and that's going to do something that might be harmful in a different way. So that's a very good point that you're raising, I think.
Thank you. Anyone else? This guy first time.
My name is Bill Nelson. I'm a selectman at Brookfield. I appreciate being able to be here tonight. I'm also a representative, two-fourth family representative of Wakefield and Brookfield. And I'm the county conqueror of the committee I'm on, telehealth.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a quick two-part question. I was looking at the inventory of point sources, and I noticed there's a bunch of citizen towns that have wastewater treatment plants, and then we have a bunch of, looks like private companies that are also inventory as part of your point source You mentioned specifically, though, it has 4 that are unpermitted. I'm just curious, are these facilities, are these businesses, do they have some sort of treatment plant on site? Number one. Number two, if they're unpermitted, what's unpermitted? What does that mean? How do they continue to operate if they don't have a permit?
The first part of that question is no, they don't have wastewater or treatment plant or anything like that. These are more or less those construction sites that are discharging somewhere. As far as what it means it doesn't have a permit, it means what they're doing is EPA doesn't want to see it. You know, this is an EPA point source database where we got this information. And they see that as what they're doing is wrong, it's not permitted. Whether they've made any changes or if they have received a permit in recent months or whatever, since the last of this update, I'm not really sure. But it's basically just saying that they were discharging from on-site and they didn't have a permit to do it. So whether it's going to be on the city to get them to comply or what.
So is it regulated then, what they're doing, and they're not following, so there must be some sort of fine or...
I don't know if there's a fine or not. I can look into it if there's a fine, but you're right. It is regulated, but what they're doing is they should have a permit if they're going to be discharging.
They'll give my contact information, and I'm curious about that.
Sure.
I to follow up on that, when I was reviewing this with Kyle, I had similar questions about the age of the permits, and so we will look into that.
And this also could be something that we've run into where EPA doesn't always keep their website up to date. And we've already run into a few problems where we're looking at some of the data that they're providing, and it's not as accurate as we know it to be. So that could be a situation where these now have permits or they've been taken off. So it could definitely be something that, this, like I said, this is, the first draft of this, and we've just started. But before this would ever go out for public consumption, we would make sure that the sites that are on there either are correct or we would take them off. But we'll definitely look into it.
Go ahead.
One quick question I forgot to ask about the septic systems. I would have, I don't know if I'd be correct in believing that maybe septic systems near water bodies, rivers and stuff could be a problem, but if it's away from them, I would think things filter through the ground, proper.
I would say that
I just couldn't see the nitrogen traveling.
I would say the septic systems that are closer to rivers are going to be more problematic, but any leaky septic system eventually is going to drain into some water body just because of the way that things drain out. It may not be as much of a priority, especially if you're talking about issues with the Great Bay. You're probably going to talk about septic systems that are closer in that area, not so further north in the watershed. But eventually, if your septic system is leaking, it's going to find its way to some water body, whether it's the Great Bay estuary or the river behind your house. It's still going to have something.
Kyle, can you clarify? This is a good question. Can you clarify? Is the issue septic systems, or is the issue septic systems that have failed in some way?
I would say septic systems that are failing are the bigger contributing factor. So I mean, the way that they are breaking this down, with the nitrogen issue for Great Bay, they're saying about 75% of it is non-point sources, and they're only about 25% are from wastewater treatment plants discharging into water bodies. So that 75%, the highest portion of that, they believe to be failing septic systems. That and stormwater runoff, those two are the biggest ones.
Okay, and to follow up on Randy's question, if a failing system is closer to a water body, it's more likely that its impact acts more like a point source.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd like to also add that seems they put golf courses right on the river. Anyone uses night, there's a golf course.
There is another aspect to septic systems, and that's septic. So the waste has to be cleaned, and then that has to be processed somewhere. And when, where it goes to, a lot of ours, when we looked at having the pipe and the different alternatives back in the mid-2000s, how to handle the waste, and one of the issues at that time was where it goes, and a lot of our waste at that point in time was going out of state, and there were questions about how long Massachusetts communities would be accepting septage from New Hampshire. The other aspect of that, so there's where it goes to be treated and the costs associated with that, and then there's also what it does when it goes into the system at a treatment facility, and how the cost of putting concentrated waste into the system, how it affects the operation of the system. So that's another aspect of this.
Mr. Archibald.
I had one question, sir. This gentleman mentioned grain barrels underneath. It'd be nice if it was the same across the country. Colorado has rules that you can't have grain barrels on the roofs. All they're not today is their water and is their grain barrels and houses that float around. Okay? There's no consistency with anything. People try to do things. For using rainwater for not flowers. But in Colorado, they make a rule that you can't collect the water. It's feast or famine night. Either, collect it, you can't collect it, you're fined for collecting your own water off your roof. People are standing up. I hope that's where we're coming to. It's got to be consistent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Archibald? About noontime today, I heard about your letter that you wrote. And so that was the first that I had heard about it was today. And so after the meeting, we went through and we think we have a picture of your property and...
Satellite?
Well, yeah. Nevertheless, if we could talk to you after the meeting and arrange time so you can come into our office and look at the assessment we did and what we were collecting. And
you did an assessment on me?
The culvert inventory is, we call it an assessment.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
We're not charging you. An assessment is a collection of data points. So I want to make sure that you're comfortable or understand what it is that we were doing out there and have access to the preliminary information, and we can have clarity then.
Okay.
Yeah, so after the meeting, if you could come and look at this and say, yes, that's my property, because we thought we were assessing.
Can I get a copy of the property? Is that report?
Of course. And we thought we were doing an inventory in the public right-of-way. And so all of the inventory that we do is in public right-of-way. So if we were not in public right-of-way, we apologize for that.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, it seems to me, Gary Chico, Brookfield Planning Board Chair, it seems to me the state has pretty specific laws addressing septic system repair. Anytime a septic system fails, it's an obligation of the owner to repair the system. And I don't see that as an issue. Yes, there may be identifying poor systems and repairing, that's another thing. I think there's a greater question here. I think this is one small venue, a group of people doing things. And it's government sponsored. And there are thousands of government-sponsored groups of people doing things. And I think that what we all fail to consider are the moral implications of our actions. Meaning that any time the government injects money into anything, even a small item, no matter what it is. Importance being the defining parameter. They create a molehill. If you create enough molehills, eventually you have a mountain. Once you have a mountain, somebody's got to pay for that mountain. There's only two ways to pay for that mountain when it's the government, and that is to print money or strip it away from the individuals that make up the citizenry. Under those conditions, when you have to strip away enough money because all the molehills have created this enormous mountain, you have a thing called socialism. Everybody in here knows what that means, and everybody knows the implications of it. I believe that's where we're headed with all these thousands of venues that are not tempered by a moral judgment of where we are going when we spend money. And I think that even the small items have to be considered very carefully in the stature of their importance versus the expense to rectify them, considering the overall problems in this country. That's really all I have to say, but I think that everybody needs to be considering those things in this day and age, considering the present situation we are all in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I was astounded by the report that rain barrel collection of waters is illegal in Colorado, so I just did a little search, and you are absolutely right that it used to be. And it's because it got sucked into laws out in the West that deal with, because water's so scarce out there, you can't divert or take water away. But at least according to what I just read here, in Colorado, 2 new laws were recently passed that exempt certain small-scale rainwater collection systems like the kind people might install at home. So I'm sure you will be happy to know that people in Colorado can now have rain barrels and not worry about somebody telling them that they can't. But it is interesting because it's a great example of a law that was enacted because of a scarce resource having unintended consequences. And one of the things we need to be careful of here in any case, when we make laws, when we do things, to be really thoughtful about what we're really trying to accomplish and make sure that what we're trying to accomplish is pinpointed enough so that we minimize the unintended consequences. But that was an interesting piece of information. Thank you for sharing that. But I'm glad to hear that our friends in Colorado can now have rain barrels.
That reflects the content.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, by Tom. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Who opposed?